Today we're going to code this web app from scratch, where you generate poetic short stories and illustrations using ChatGPT. When I click this button, a Flask application will start to generate a conversation. Here we see the output from the Flask application, where we're talking to ChatGPT using the API, and we're asking for it to generate an image after it's generated the story. And the result is something like this. The theme of my app is to generate content in the style of Rumi, the great Sufi mystic of the 13th century. But yours can be whatever style you want, since we're using OpenAI's APIs, which work just like ChatGPT and DALL-E. Here's another example that I generated earlier. I'm a big fan of the art from this one, and I find it so cool that this is a brand new image that's never existed before. We're building this application end to end, so be sure to check the timestamps if you want to jump ahead or go back to a previous step. We'll start by prototyping code for the API using a Jupyter notebook, and then we'll roll that up into a simple Flask application that's going to be the backend for the web app we were just looking at. Lastly, we'll throw together a front end using Vue, a JavaScript framework. Let's get going. I'm Alex, a data engineer and product developer. If you're building online or looking to optimize your life or your work with technology, I think you'll find great value on my channel. This video is part of my software developer series. So let's start by looking at the application diagram. Starting at the top, we have our web application. This takes in an image and HTML and CSS elements. Both of these are generated using a Vue application. The application triggers a Flask API, which fetches data from OpenAI's API. First thing I want to do is create a directory for my project. I'm going to call it Mystic Hallucinations app. Let's go in here. And now I want to create a new folder for each part of the application. First thing I'm going to do is prototype things using a Jupyter notebook. So I'm going to make a folder called Notebooks. And inside of there, I'm going to make a source folder. You can do that with one command using this P flag. And then I'm going to boot up my Jupyter notebook. Okay, here we go. So let's start a new one using Python 3. And what we want to do right now, that's fine, is give this guy a title. So the first thing I want to do is just make some requests with ChatGPT. I have a previous video on this, so if you're just getting started, I suggest you check that one out first. And come on back here to continue basically where that one left off. I'm going to be bringing in some functions that I wrote there. So the first thing I want to do is get my OpenAI API key into my application. So I'm going to use OS, and I'm going to grab it from my environment. Environments are a great way to store keys because then you don't have to have them in your source code. Now, if we could check to make sure this is okay, you know, if this doesn't exist, I could raise a value error, for example. No end variable set. Okay, so I don't have it. I misspelled it. Okay, OpenAI API key. So now we're cooking. If you don't have one of these, you can generate one from the developer console for OpenAI's API platform. And then what you can do is just throw it in here as a text string. Or you can export it to your environment like I have, and you can load it this way. So the first thing I want to do is just test the chat completions endpoint. This is what we're going to be using for ChatGPT. I wrote this code in a previous video, and I'm just going to ask it to tell me something interesting. Let's go ahead and run that. Okay, so I can call this one. And let's see what happens. Cool. So it looks like I got a good response back. And now I can go ahead and take a look at the JSON content of that in order to see what data is in there. It's telling me an interesting word is serendipity. It recurs to the occurrence of fortunate events by luck. You know, that's not that interesting, but it's given me better interesting words in the past. Damn, let's just try it again. Okay, now it's just telling me straight up this word. Long. Okay, so it just means long. Well, there you go. Okay, so our API is working well. That's cool. So now what I want to do is have a conversation with this in order to generate the type of data I want, which is going to be a story. I'll start by defining something called the system setting. Here's where you tell ChatGPT about what its goal is going to be. I'm going to say you are a poet who writes in the style of the mystic philosopher Rumi. Next, we're going to set a few prompts to ask it. Since this is a conversation, there's going to be multiple prompts that I want to tell it. The first I'm going to say is write a short story using less than 500 words. Once it's done that, the next thing I want to ask it is write a title for the story. So the general structure of our conversation will look like this. I'm going to keep track of a messages list. This is going to be everything that we're telling ChatGPT, and as well everything that it's telling us back. You'll see how this works. So I need to start by defining a system role. And this one is going to have content that is my system setting. Now I'm going to start iterating over my prompts. Spelling, it's hard. Okay, and every time I iterate, I want to append the next message into my messages list. This one's going to have a role of a user. And the content here is going to be the prompt itself. So if I was to run this, we can look at what's going to be happening. We'll start with this system setting, and then we'll go into these user prompts, but this isn't going to be the full picture. In order to get the full picture, we actually have to start talking to ChatGPT. So at this stage, we're going to be ready to talk with it, and I'm going to say ChatGPT get chat completions messages. Now this is going to be a new function, and we're going to have to define this. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to lift some code from my reference notebook here. This is very similar to the test function that we were calling earlier. And if you want more information on how this was created, have a look at that previous video. It's just a quick 5-minute video where we introduced the chat completions API for ChatGPT. What's important is that this function is going to return a piece of data, which is a dictionary in Python. And we're going to want to parse information from that dictionary. Let's have a look at an example. I'm just going to go ahead and print that and break out of our code. You can see it has printed it, and what it's done actually, it's just telling us that it's made a post request. I have some code in our call function that prints this out. So if I wait a bit, I should see the response. So here I printed the response. It's actually quite long. It's also telling us some information about the usage, how many tokens we've used, which is interesting. What I need to do though is I need to get the content out of this piece of data here. Let's have a look at how I would do that. So GPT response, and I want the choices, it looks like, and the first one, and then I want the message. And this is pretty cool. It's actually got it formatted into a role assistant content already for me. So what I can do is just take this message and append this onto my messages array. Here's what I mean. I'm not going to print any of this stuff. All I really want to do is append. And I don't need to go ahead and write anything other than this. I want to append the next message. And I'll show you what the messages array looks like in the end, so you can understand what's happening here. But this is how we're going to be able to carry out a conversation. Lastly, I like to roll things up into functions when possible. So I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to call this one write mystic hallucination. Booyah. We're going to get back messages list. All right, I can also sort of bring that code into here. All right, I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm going to save that. And let's get rid of this one, and let's call this. So that took a couple minutes. It's very slow right now. You can see my first post request, not much data. But the next time I sent a request, we have all of this data because I need to tell the API every single time about the history of our conversation. And lastly, the prompt here is to write a title for the story. So I can look at the messages and we can see this in a more structured way. Let's have a look at the first message. The first message is the system setting. The next message is the prompt to write a short story. And the message after that actually has the short story in it. So while we're here, let's go ahead and parse that out. Great, so that is our short story. Let's keep going. I'm gonna have a look at the message content of the next one, which is me asking to create a title. And here is the actual title itself. Cool. I'm gonna put that above the story. So let's use the Jupyter notebook to print this out in a more readable way. What we can do is import a function to display HTML and have a look at it that way. So from ipython.display import HTML. Boom. Okay, great. And now all I would need to do is feed in some HTML string here. So let's have a title with an h1 tag. And we're going to put our title here. So title we decided was messages for content. And let's have a story piece of data for this guy. Okay, and then in the story, maybe we'll, I don't know, put it in a div. See how this looks. All right, that's not bad. I guess the title, I could strip out the quotes, might look a little bit better. Probably put a break in here. It's looking a little bit better. The story does not, it's not showing the line breaks properly, which I want to do. So let's see what I can do about that. What I want to do is have breaks, right? Instead of new lines. So maybe what I can do is join this after I split it on the new line character. Let's try that. Nice. This is looking pretty cool, and this is a brand new story. The Whisper of the Rose, a journey of healing and wisdom. Once upon a time, in the heart of a bustling city, there lived a wise old man named Abraham. He was known throughout the land for his deep wisdom and connection to the divine. People from far and wide would come to seek his advice, guidance, and solace. Abraham, however, was a recluse who rarely ventured outside his small, humble dwelling, preferring the solitude of his thoughts. This is amazing. It never ceases to amaze me, like this tool. Let's see the end. With her heart filled with newfound strength and hope, Farah left Abraham's dwelling, stepping out into the world with a sense of purpose and gratitude. And the wise old man returned to his solitude, his unwavering connection to the divine, ensuring that his guidance would forever be felt by those who sought it. So now we've prototyped our app. Let's put this into a Flask application. In order to do that, I'm going to use ChatGPT's help. Let's say write a basic get endpoint for a Flask application. It has indeed gone above and beyond. Not just writing the endpoint, but telling me exactly how to go ahead and run it. Crazy. So if I go to my directory, which I called this, I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it Flask app. And I can show you what that looks like. So it's in my main folder, and then inside of that. Okay, and here I'm going to just use my global Python environment to make sure I have Flask installed. Next, I want to make a file called app.py, and I want to paste in this code that ChatGPT has given me. Okay, I've got that in there. Let's see what else ChatGPT says. It's kind of telling me how to run it. Great. Let's open up VS Code from here, and we'll start editing this file. Okay. So here's the file that I just created. I want to change my endpoint. I'm going to call it generate and then / mystic hallucination. Pretty happy with that. Maybe that'll be a dash. I don't know. And below here, we're gonna do this: generate mystic hallucination, and then we're gonna return what that is. And in order to do this, we've kind of just prototyped it, right? So it should be pretty straightforward to bring this code in. So let's make sure we got our imports, and we're going to need an API key here too. So I'll throw those in here. I also like that check, because if the API key is not set, can sometimes be giving weird errors, so let's make sure we're checking for that. Next, I want this chat completions endpoint. I'm going to throw that below. All right. And what other functions do I want? Well, I could grab my write mystic hallucinations one. Okay, looking good so far. And here, what I want is to do that. And then I'll want to parse some data out of here, right? So let's say response data equals, I want my title, right? And then I want my, let's say, story. Okay, so for the title, how did we get that? We can take a look at this function here. Actually, let's go ahead and plug that in. And this is looking pretty good. That should get me my title that I want. And this will be my story here. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. Maybe what I want to do is just go ahead and return the HTML. Let's see how that works. Okay, I want to do that, and rather than defining it, I could just go ahead and return it. Feeling pretty good about this. I'd like to test this now. Okay, so I'm already running Flask from earlier. Let me take care of that. Clean that up. Okay, now we're cooking, and I can come in here. If I go back to my web browser, so I'll open up an incognito window. So my Flask logger, I can see that I am submitting a post request. And now if I wait a few minutes, I should see it carry out the conversation. Bouncing back to my browser, I can see that Flask is doing its job. And I'm returning an object with the HTML. So now let's code the front end. I'm going to be using Vue for that. So here I'm using the Vue CLI, which you can download, and I'll say Vue create Vue app. Okay, it seems like I've got a preset from what I've used in the past. I'm just going to call it Vue 3 default. And it's going to go ahead and create me a project. Okay, I can see it here. I can go into there and I can do yarn serve to get this running. Okay, let's copy this. And we'll go to a new tab here and have a look at it. So this is my brand new app. And there's a bunch of buttons I can click. There's a picture here. So I want to just generally clean this up, and I want to get this serving my Flask endpoint. So I can see if I go back to my code that I've got a whole bunch of files that it's created me. This is my Vue app here, including a logo, a component. I'm going to go into my terminal and just kind of clean this up. And actually, I'll bring down the app for a second so I can do that. So I don't want this favicon anymore. I do want the index. Okay, what else? In source, let's see what's in my assets folder. I don't need a logo. In fact, I don't care about any assets, so I'll get rid of that. And inside of components, I've got this hello world. I'm gonna move that, and I'm gonna call it story view dot view, and I'm probably gonna have to change some things in my app to account for that, but otherwise I feel like everything else belongs. So let's have a look. Everything else is closed. This is all new stuff with my Vue application. So the index is looking fine. This is going to give some default stuff if there's no JavaScript installed. Let's check out this story view. So they called this one Hello World. So what you can see is we're sort of bringing this message as a string. But as we know, what I want to do is bring in some story HTML. And I'm going to use camel case. Actually, no, we'll do that. Cool. We want this to be called story view. And I'm bringing in HTML. Once I bring in my HTML, I want to display that. And I can do that with Vue using this vHTML flag, I believe. And let's get rid of the name on that. And I don't want any of this stuff. I lost my div tag. There it is. Okay. So I want to test this. I want to see if this story HTML will work like I've coded it here. So let's go to my app, and in my app I have this hello world tag, but I don't want this. I want this to be story view. And I'm going to come down here and make sure I'm importing story view properly. Okay, so now story view, and this I misspelled too. Okay, good. So I'm pretty happy with this. Still getting some errors because message is not expected, right? It should be the story HTML. And just to test that it's working, let's kind of like bold the welcome in here. And the template root requires exactly one element. I think it's mad about what I've done here. I think I need to wrap this in a root element. Oh no, I need to wrap this in a root element. Okay, now everything should be working better. Ooh, except I didn't quite finish the story on this. And now I want to test this guy out. So I'm going to serve it again. It's missing the logo asset. Now I deleted that, so I certainly expect it to be missing. Let's delete that. All right, now everybody's happy. And I can go back to my app. And what I should see is something here, but I do not. Okay, so I just had a typo. So this is what we expect to see. Tell me about welcoming me to my app. So if you notice things you think I could be doing better for the next time, please let me know in the comments below. If you notice things you liked that I did, let me know that as well so that I know to keep doing that stuff. So now what we want to do is hook this up to our backend. So in order to do that, I'm going to be needing to make requests from Vue, and I can do that with something called Axios. So I'm going to put that into my import statement here. And then I can create a method that's going to call my Flask API. And it's going to look something like this. Okay, so to test this out, I'm going to set up a little endpoint. This is called ping. And I'm going to put that response into a data. So let's have our data for the application. So the piece of data that I'm interested in is this story HTML. So let's just call it story HTML. And in Vue, I need to give it some starting variable. Now when I come up here, I want to display that story HTML. So again, in Vue, oops, I can do that like this. Okay, so to start off, if I was to hop back into my app, I should see some variables going on here. So I never use this response. Right, so what I want to do is, let's say I'm going to expect a dictionary back. And so what I'll do is I'll say this dot story HTML equals my response, and I'll call it dot story HTML. Okay. So you can see what this function's doing. Now I need a way of calling this, and so I'm going to need a button on my page, and I'm going to say on click. I want to call this function. Okay, that should work. And I better have a name here, and I'm going to say generate story. So let's go back to Flask and make sure we have this endpoint properly set up. I can actually open it up right here. So using the same style as below, I'll say app.route, and I want to call it ping. I want to make sure that it's a getable route, and we'll define a function here, and I'm just going to return some test data. I wanted story HTML, and I'm going to say hello from Flask. Now, this is not going to work because these are not going to be on the same origin. So what I need is some cross-origin functionality here. I'm going to go back to ChatGPT, and I'm going to say write an endpoint for local development. I'm going to say course considerations. This is where ChatGPT can be really helpful because you need some knowledge. It helps to have done this type of thing before, but rather than referring to documentation, ChatGPT can basically be an interactive portal into that documentation. So it's telling me I need this Flask cores library. So I'll start by hopping over to wherever I'm doing Flask. And I'll go ahead and make sure I have that installed. Meanwhile, we're going to grab some of this code. I do want JSONify now. And let's grab that and throw that here. And how do I actually start cores? I can enable it right here for all routes. Just like this. Great. Okay, I'm going to get rid of that app. This is my app. And so this is like a cross-origin rule where now I don't need to be on the same domain. In production, this would not be what you want because it's unsafe. But for development, it is exactly what we need. And I want to JSONify this. Okay, cool. And what else are we wanting to do? I'll probably need to JSONify this thing here as well. So I'll just get ahead of myself and do that. Okay, now this is the method I want to test, this sort of ping. Let's go ahead and do that. So I need to make sure I can get back here, and I'm just gonna run it. So let's see, was there an error? Nope. So it looks like it's working. It's running on port 5000. That's great. So inside my view, if I start that again, yarn serve, then I can test that function out. Doesn't like Axios because I never installed it. So yarn add Axios. Okay, I'm gonna hop back to my app. We'll reload this. So I've got this button to generate a story. I'm gonna keep an eye on my console, see if I get any errors here. And when I'm clicking this, I'm not seeing anything happening. And if I look at my, I am calling it here. Cool. So there's more like a problem with my Vue app. Right. So what I need to do here is access the data. Great. So now it's saying hello, and I'm printing messages to my console. I think we're ready now to actually integrate this with ChatGPT, which is going to be a great landmark to get to. From there, all we have to do is clean things up and add in that image generation piece, and we're done. So in order to get this working how I want, I need to change this endpoint to the one that we set up to actually serve the right data. So I'll copy that here. From there, I want to make sure I have this story HTML that I can parse. So I better call that story HTML. Otherwise, I should be good to go here. I have my code to write my hallucination. I'm loading my environment variables. So I believe this should work, and it should just go ahead and provide me a bunch of HTML, which is then going to get piped into this variable, printed to the console, and then printed to our screen using this story view. So I don't expect it to look very pretty, but I do expect it at this point to work. So when I click generate new story, I can see now from my Flask log that it is kicking off that familiar message to ChatGPT. And if I wait a couple minutes, I expect this to continue outputting some data for me, and then it should show up right away in our web app. And here it is. So now let's clean this up, get it looking a little bit prettier, and we'll add in our image generation. Let's go back to our Jupyter notebook and code a function to create an image for our story. The first thing I want is a more generalized function to call ChatGPT with. If you recall earlier, we have a ChatGPT get function that has a hard-coded endpoint. Here I'm pulling in a function where we can pass the endpoint as a variable into the function. We're also going to pass data into the function, and both of these are going to get sent through to the ChatGPT API in this line when we make our request. From here, I can start playing around with the images endpoint. Here's what the data is going to look like for that. The endpoint is called images/generations, and you can go to OpenAI's documentation to learn about this. And the type of data it expects is some prompt about what image to generate, the number of images to generate, and the size of those images. From there, I can pass this data in, and I can get some type of response back. So let's give it a shot. And for my prompt, I need to define this variable. And so I can do that. And let's put it down here. And what do we want to see an image of? Well, I should probably do something relating to the story earlier. So this was the title of my story. And I'm going to say a prompt that looks like this. I'll say an image of, how about an illustration for the story. And I need some quotes, if you'll let me. Thank you. And here's my story. Actually, I don't. Oh dear. Okay, that's my story. Yeah, let's say in the style of Sufi art. See if it can do something like that for me. It didn't like that. It's too many quotes. Okay, here we go. It's working on something. I love generating images. I find this stuff so exciting. And I can't wait to see what the response looks like. So it's telling me when it created it, and it's giving me a URL. And so I should be able to grab my image right in the notebook here. So if I, from display, I can import image, and then I can pass in a URL for that image. And we can look at it right here. Wow. Okay, wow. It's a little creepy. By the way, if you like this kind of content, you can like this video in order to get the YouTube algorithm to recommend more of it for you. It also helps me out, and if you like what I'm presenting, you can subscribe to my channel for more stuff like this in the future. Now what we need to do is bring this sort of functionality into our web app. So what I want to do is use this brand new ChatGPT get function and make sure we have that implemented in Flask. See, this is what the last one looked like. It was sort of this get chat completions, and it kind of took this messages object, and I kind of made data based on it. So I don't want to use that anymore. I want to use this one now instead. And I guess what I could do is keep using this endpoint and just call this one from inside of here. So what I'm saying is that the goal is to actually just go ahead and return this. And what I want to do is pass in two things. I want to pass in the endpoint, and that's going to be this endpoint here. And lastly, I want to pass in some data, and that's going to be this data right here. All right, so now what I can do is just get rid of this piece because that's all copied below. And this should work pretty nicely for me here. Next, what I need is an image generating endpoint. And I can do that here. And I could call it something like ChatGPT get images generations. Okay, and I want to have some, I guess, like some type of prompt that I pass in here. And I'm just going to return the ChatGPT get in the same way I did for this one. Yeah, and I'm going to get rid of this prompt that I wrote. Otherwise, this is looking great. I guess for the sake of, you know, should do that for, so that these look the same. Nice. Now, analogous to this right mystic hallucination function, I want something like draw mystic hallucination image, let's say, and for this I am going to need to bring in a title. And from there, what I can say is my GPT response is going to be from this function, and I'm going to need to craft a prompt. And I'm going to pick that up from something that I wrote earlier. Okay, so here's the prompt. It's going to be an illustration of title in the style of kalimkari art. So if we look up this type of art, you'll see why I was interested in this. So I'd like ChatGPT to generate us stuff that looks kind of like this, because I think it's beautiful and super cool, and I'd love to see some stuff like this coming out of it. Just look how beautiful this is. It's so cool. Great. So after I get my response, well, let's see. We'll sort of follow the treasure trail back, and what am I looking for? You know, in this case, I'm just kind of appending these messages. Well, maybe what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and return the full response, and then I'll sort of deal with it later. Now let's see where I call this. Right, so I get my messages here. Okay, so what I want to do now is say GPT, image response equals, I called it draw, and I wanted to send my title in here. And now what I'll need is my image URL. And I expect that if I go back to my notebook, it was in the data and then the URL field, right? So that means what I'll need is to get the data and the first element, because in general we might create multiple images from here. You could say pick our favorite. And what I'll do is pass that in here as the image URL. And I'll post that here. Nice. Now we're building out a more complicated endpoint that's going to make this function call like we need. And what I can do is bounce over to my app to test this. But in order to test this properly, I better have a story image URL. And I better write it with my response.data dot, I think I just called it image URL. Yep. And as I learned earlier, I want to print that to the console in case I have some bug that's not letting it work properly in my story. But otherwise, what I'm looking for is to just create an image tag. The source here is going to be my story image URL, and I'll call it the story image as my alt tag, so that I can kind of see something before it loads. And let's roll. Let's do this. I'm ready to go. Okay, so I can kind of see this sort of story image is working. There's no errors yet. So let's generate it. So again, we can see the first message I sent, then the follow-up message, and now a third message which we're asking for the image, which based on our story title is The Journey of Surrender, Unveiling the Secrets of Enlightenment. Okay, here we go. This one's pretty far out. It's pretty cool. I love the green style of it. And so as a last step, I like to just get this looking a little bit prettier. And in order to do that, I'm going to be pulling in a bunch of code that I wrote earlier. So starting with my image, I'm going to give it an ID. I'm also going to change how my button works. here's the button that I want to use. And I'm missing a div tag. Okay, great. So I've got this kind of story image and this generate button class. Otherwise, my button should be pretty similar. And what I want to do is come down and grab a whole bunch of formatting CSS, and I'm going to apply that in my style section. Okay, so my button is looking a little bit better. That's what I want. Next, let's go into my story view. Here, what I want to make sure is that this div has the right class. I also don't want to have any kind of alt text on this one. Okay, well, it's probably good enough for now. Let's go ahead and run it. Oh. Okay. The other thing I want to do is be smart. So here I've got story generation in progress, which I'm going to keep track of as a data element. I want that one, and there's another one that I want, and I want to know if my story's been generated or not. So let's say story generated, and both of these are going to be false to start out. And what I'll do is, I don't actually want to show my story here until it's been generated. So I'll use this VIF, and I'll say story generated. So only if it's been generated will I show this chunk of HTML inside of here. You can see I'm doing similar VIF and VElse logic for this sort of generation in progress one. The next step here is actually updating these based on the response that I get back. So once I get a response back, I'll make sure that that's set to false. I'll make sure that this is set to true. And what else do I need? Well, I better make sure that this is set to true at the beginning. Whew. Okay, here we go. So, get some formatting. Everything seems to be working well. If I come over to my application here, let's make sure we spawn a new window. And let's give it a shot. Okay, now it says generating story, and it shouldn't let me click on this. So if I go to my terminal, I've just asked it to generate something. If I keep clicking this, it hasn't spawned any more processes, which is great. Let's give it a minute and we'll see the final result. Wow. I just love these pictures. This one is Gardens of Wisdom, the Mystic's Journey. Now the styling is still not working very well. Looks like I was missing one small thing. If I search here, I have a frame style which is not being applied because I never made this the right class. And now that I've done that, it should style properly, but I'm gonna have to go and regenerate. So we're doing it one more time. So as promised, here's the properly formatted result. Here we have the whisper of the heart, wisdom and love in the city of Konya. And we have this eerily creepy love image. As you can tell, I'm pretty happy with this app. I had a lot of fun creating it. I've put all of the source code for this app on GitHub, and that's in the comments below. So you can go ahead there and clone that repository if you want to check this out for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. I'm looking forward to doing this again and expanding on what we can do with the world of AI and large language models. See you in the next one.